Hello, everyone. How we doing tonight? I am doing great, thank you. All right, so I don't know who out of the people who are here today were there yesterday, but we did go over yesterday pretty quickly. Had a very busy night, but I still didn't want to cancel it. So I just want us to revisit the fact that for me, yesterday, even though we had opportunities, it was a very ugly day, if I can say so, right? And is more specifically the fact that it was pretty unclear, but we had to remind ourselves of the ideas that we had in the weekly outlook, which was unless ES will invalidate this inverted fair value gap, well, invalidate this fair value gap, so invert the fair value gap, then I'm going to expect a continuation towards higher prices and an aggressive retracement once that is met, right? So still what I'm looking for. Now we have the possibility of forming a swing at this level, right? So having what basically is today on this chart, but having tomorrow form some sort of manipulation higher into just a simple distribution lower. So we'll have to check up on that. But since this specific candle can currently form both swings, so it can be a swing low and a swing high, I'm going to expect some sort of move to this order block, right? But enough about tomorrow, more about today, right? We had a beautiful range, which now we can't see, which pisses me off. Oh yeah, no, we still have the same range since I do utilize midnight open for the candles. So 183 handles as of now. So quite a day filled with opportunity. I want to start us on a 4-hour chart because that is where price is cleanest, right? That's what I always tell my students whenever price is unclear on a daily chart, just head over to a 4-hour, right? It is just something that I personally lost track. And just the fact that we did not go dive into what my 4-hour lower objectives were really messed me up due to the divergence, right? There are a lot of SMT on the highs, on the lows, just comparing everything, but we seem to be looking to catch up, meaning that ES finally wants to go grab this swing, which on NASDAQ we already took, but most specifically this one into the fair value gap as NASDAQ, sorry, not ES, has done today. Right, so we'll dive now lower into a 15-minute chart where we can see our sessions and look at what we could have traded today. Based on intraday draws on liquidity, you did have a London framework telling you to go lower. Now, with an open into manipulation, right? This is what we see. We saw Asia as manipulation and low of day. I did not expect us to retrace there once we opened this close, sorry, because with this manipulation, I did expect us to go target our relative equal highs. So I was looking at a previous PM framework which we did not complete on either asset. As you can see here on NASDAQ, we took out the highs, did not reach the lows, but you did have an indication of such a thing due to the SMT that happened during the morning, right? And if we go to the left as well, we can see that there was no SMT before then, right? I'm looking at, this is not a swing low, same thing though. So no SMT at what we would consider basically for a low of day, right? We talked about it greatly at length this week about candidates for low of day. When do I expect some specific price action to form the low of the day or slash the high of the day, right? So just all that to say pretty much that wasn't the cleanest opening, but we did have a beautiful opportunity with the PM session. But we'll first dive into the morning session, right? So just in general, we had news. I believe it was at 10 a.m. I am gonna go confirm that we did not have anything else. We also had 8:30. Okay, so you had news at 10 a.m. and you also had 8:30 news. So I'm just gonna mark them out. 8:30 swing is right here. Mark that as news. We had unemployment claims, I believe, pending home sales, and we had something at 10 a.m. also. Whenever we talk about news, whenever we look at news, there is one specific thing we are looking for, and it's manipulation. Now that formed at 8:30, And I believe there was SMT at this level. Was it in comparison to London? I do not seem to remember. So no, we took out everything on both NASDAQ and ES, and the reason why I'm not looking at YM is because the SMT is not as strong as between these two main assets. So I disregard SMT with YM most of the time. But we did have SMT at right after the 930 open, right? 952 right here on ES going lower, while on NASDAQ we were going higher. So all that to say, lots of divergence. And again, here at the highs, lots of divergence, which does not mean that you couldn't filter through it and find some high probability opportunities. Now, at 10 a.m., I was looking for an open low to get us to this objective, but we had already met it, right? That I'm talking about my pre-market plan here. So just to go back over it, if we head over to a 15-minute chart, this was the higher time frame swing that I wanted ES and NASDAQ to basically catch up to these swings. So I was looking into this. I was looking for higher into our daily fair value gap. And by the way, this swing represents my daily fair value gap. So I'm going to go back to it. And here I'll just remove it. So you'll see this swing also represents my daily fair value gap, which I can anticipate a reaction out of. And we did have that first reaction before the news, but with the conservative approach of my model, you would concentrate on looking to trade only after the last high impact news, which means only after 10 p.m. 10 a.m. Sorry, not p.m. Now, looking at this open low, because that's what I see. I see open, I see accumulation, I see a manipulation lower that did not form SMT at this very specific price level, but we had SMT right before, which you could use at good confluence that you could anticipate higher prices. Now, since my higher prices objective was our fair value gap, our daily fair value gap, which yes, we already tapped into, then that's what came that we had a tiny move out of that. And that did not even offer any sort of unicorn entry. So yes, you did have your breaker, but the unicorn entry would have happened after your low-hanging fruit objective has been met. So to me, there was no setup there for that upwards move, which means that I would then look for an idea going lower, targeting all of this low resistance liquidity, going for a new low of day, possibly taking out London lows, which would have formed a London framework. And based on that very specific idea, you did have a setup. Now, if we look at 1030, where you understand here, I see we have a question though very quickly. Only have a question. How do you approach when you have news at 8:30 and at 10 like tomorrow? Same thing as today, right? That's what happened today. So depending on price, more specifically, right? And again, this is something I brought to attention this week as well, which is when to expect the 10 a.m. news to be expansion and not linked to manipulation, right? I talked about that. Well, I use the same thing on 8:30 because even on 8:30 news, you would wait for 9:30 as a conservative approach. And now because you have 10 a.m. news, you're not going to trade beforehand unless you expect that 10 a.m. news to be manipulation. Now on 9:30, we did not get a nice just swing lower as we would anticipate for higher prices. We just expanded there. So just based on that, I would have waited for the opening range, more specifically to end. Why? Because I did not get the direction I wanted for my Judas. I wanted to trade this upwards move. So instead of trying to chase said upwards move, I would wait for my objective to be met to later trade either a higher time frame retracement, which is what we got in my opinion here, or just straight up an expansion lower. Does that make any sense? So basically, I would wait for 10 a.m. depending on if I would expect it to be manipulation, which would mean I would wait for 9:30 before trading, or uh, if it's manipulation, I'll wait until after the news, and if I expect it to be expansion, then I'll wait until 9:30, which means I would start trading then. So it's gonna depend basically on what happens at 9:30. I'm going to be in front of my charts. I'm going to be looking at it. And if I get the reaction that I want, the Judas swing that I want, then I can look into trading before the 10 a.m. news, more specifically. But just now, get my pleasure. So just getting back into price, right? We have divergence, which came later than the entry. just from the SMT that is here. I'm going to mark out this as what it is because it is getting semi-confusing for me to have blue everywhere. So I'm going to say FVG low on my daily. So daily fair value gap low. Now, we had divergence here with ES putting up higher highs at this level, which is a great indication that you could look for lower prices. And it's funny because at that specific point, we had a breaker block. Oh, I kind of moved it. We had a breaker block right here, which also leads you to look for a unicorn. And where do you have a unicorn? Well, you have a fair value gap at this level, but also an inverse fair value gap first. So there's an entry. Let me just draw this inverse real quick. And the reason why that inverse is your entry rather than the fair value gap above is because it's closer, right? You're looking for the first overlapping PD array of your breaker block, and you did not form any other fair value gaps at this level. You did have a volume imbalance, which I don't utilize for entries. I just noticed though that there is an inverted fair value gap here. So I actually showed you guys the wrong entry. I showed you guys the entry I traded, which I guess I did not spot this inverted fair value gap at first. But whenever we do our price action reviews, I like to look at it as a purely mechanical approach, which would mean that your first entry would be here. So that's where you'd enter. So if we just look very quickly at what kind of setup that offered, well, actually, first we do need to find objectives. And how do I do that? Well, if I'm framing a move lower, this can either be a retracement lower or an expansion lower. So I'm going to have a final objective, and that objective would be the data lows into London lows. So I would definitely hold a runner up until London lows. But as you can see from my little drawing of a breaker, 146 handles, I'm not going to hold a full position for that long, right? I'm going to take profit along the way. And now where would be my range up to then? Well, I would utilize London, which formed the manipulation, not our daily manipulation, which was it definitely made in Asian, but I'm going to use that manipulation to count this as my impulse price swing. Or you could also utilize the range from the first news of the day, right? The 8:30 a.m. news, which is the range that formed SMT later, but from that point you did not know. I'm going to utilize the easiest one, which would be London, right? Daily manipulation. And if we look at standard deviations here, nothing too clean, definitely. Hence why I don't like using standard deviations for reversals. I like using them as high probability objectives. But just a little side note, if we look to a 5-minute chart and we look at our premium and discount, yeah, I'll hide the indicators for a second. We look at our premium and discount. What is your first objective, right? Where would it be? Well, very simple. You look at the first in efficiency and discount. And where is that? We have a 5-minute order block right here. Why do I not use this tiny little line? Because it's too picture perfect. Okay, so yes, this is your high probability order block, but I'm going to use all of the candles above instead of using just the last part of the leg. But anyways, I would not target the order block. I would target the liquidity for a sweep into the order block. So I would take profit at the liquidity and not directly at the order block. I am going to point it out because that is your low-hanging fruit objective. And with ES showing that it was stronger, you would not have anticipated that then ES would become the weaker asset and that NASDAQ would not reach its complete full objective, right? But it happens sometimes. You can't do anything about it, right? 1-minute chart, looking at this candle, entry at this level, right after tapping back into the 10 a.m. open, your stop, you would have inverted fair value gap, inverted fair value gap, and fair value gap. So my stop would be at the top, the height of the candle that forms a fair value gap, which is my last PD array that I could use as defense, right? Because at the point I'm entering here, we did not yet inverse this tiny small fair value gap. So I wouldn't count it because it's not yet inverse when I'm entering on this 1033 candle at this specific level. Now, if we look at our low-hanging fruit, which was taking this liquidity in the premium, I'm going to remove some drawings here. So I'm going to remove the range, but I explained which range I was utilizing and why. Had a beautiful partial here, 2.26R. into the 5-minute order block, which was your low-hanging fruit. And what I usually tell with the low-hanging fruit objective is get the most you can there, right? Take out the most amount of money there, break even your position, just leave a runner on because you don't care. And at this specific point, I had my stop at the 10 a.m. open, just holding. And when I saw that ES took out the low while NASDAQ didn't, I got out, which was, if I look right here, 1134 specifically. So definitely beautiful SMT formed at this point, but you would have held up to a potential of, if we look at the mid-range of the 1134 candle, which is this one, you would have been looking at about 4R. So definitely a great trade, actually. At this level of R, you can never be mad. Beautiful trade, especially after consolidating like that. You would have had a very low resistance run into consolidation, but you already took profits, right? Mechanically defined take profits, just take all the stress out of it. And if you're going to talk to me about possibly getting into a long, I'm not going to talk about it because that was not an interesting move in my opinion. And yes, you can talk to me about SMT. And yes, the model is present. You do have a fair value gap. You do have a unicorn entry, but how do you frame it on a higher time frame? Now we're in a daily bearish fair value gap. Even if you want to frame that, hey, we went into this fair value gap and now we're going to go higher and go for previous week's high. Yes, this is what I'm looking for on my weekly, but it is not a high probability move. It could also very well much form a swing high at this level and then expand lower to go target these lows that were not made pretty, right? As I explained yesterday. So since the daily direction is so unclear on the last week of the month and I don't have a 4-hour framework, I don't have anything interesting, well, I am going to be looking for the possibility of shorting later on as well, but I'm not going to be looking for a long. And if you see, you could have had a great long, sure, consolidation right here to target, yes. But if you're just getting out of this trade, you shouldn't be looking to reverse your position. You should be looking to close your charts. We're not becoming traders to stay on our charts the whole day, right? If not, just go get a full-time job. There's no point in learning how to trade. So definitely, that's why basically I'm not going to get into the depth of the long after the short. But what I am going to get into are PM opportunities. If I bring my indicators back so we can see our sessions, you'll see a beautiful lunch trade. I did already post on Twitter earlier today about it. And I believe Jordan made a post about it, talking about his trade. But definitely a very, very clean setup. So I do want to get into it. Lunch trades in the last week or two have been very, very highly successful, meaning there were no non-successful lunch trades in the last 2 weeks, I believe. So I would have to go back into it. But I remember that I've been trading more lunch trades in these last 2 weeks than I've had since the beginning of the year. So actually quite refreshing to see. Looking at the range, noon to 1:30. And why would you not look at the noon to 1? Like I said earlier this week in a price action review. Well, very simple, because the high was made there and we didn't have a raid up until 1:30, so it takes all the guesswork out of it. Now, precisely at 1:30, had a small Judas swing, go take out the high on both NASDAQ and ES. So they both rated the objective. From this point, you understand that ES is weaker. So where will the better short setup be on ES, right? Definitely, right? Through SMT. And I'm not talking about this SMT. I'm talking about the morning SMT, which I will draw again because I have delayed it on NASDAQ. But this SMT right here, you understand that the latest SMT tells you that NASDAQ is the stronger asset. So if I'm trying to short, I'm going to concentrate on the weaker asset. So we are going to move over and look at ES mainly. But yes, there was still a setup, a beautiful unicorn setup. As you can see, high, low, higher high, broke the low, which means this is now a breaker block. And then you have a balanced price range, the fair value gap right here, which gave you a short. And why would you have made money? Because using your latest expansion range, you reached a discount. And more specifically, you would have reached your low-hanging fruit objective, which again, premium and discount. First, discount inefficiency in a 5-minute chart. I explained it greatly at length in my video, that is where it's going to reverse if it needs to reverse. That's it. If not, you're just offside, sadly. But enough talking about that, we're going to look at the better asset. So I'm actually going to remove NASDAQ from here, and we're going to concentrate fully on ES for once, which later during the year, meaning in summer months, Q3, I like to play a lot more ES. I've noticed that it actually looks a lot cleaner, just in general. Now, although on ES you get a lot of equal levels, like this, for example, I would consider this a swing high, even though the candle to the left and the candle to the right are not lower high compared to the middle candle. I understand that ES is less volatile, so it's going to make more equal levels. So this is a swing high, meaning that this is a swing high. This very specific two candles right here, two candles with this one to the left, forms a swing high. So this candle that also forms a swing low is my breaker block. Now, is this the easiest one to see? No, clearly not. And you did have another entry possibility if the only breaker you were able to spot is this one. I'll just show it off very quickly. If you look to the left, you'll see a beautiful inverse fair value gap that gave you an entry right here at 154. And the stop that you would have had, you have an order block above plus the inverted fair value gap and another inverted fair value gap right here. So my stop at the high of the order block right here, 2.75 handles, is a beautiful, with your objective being at lunch lows for 3.36R, right? So you did have an entry, but I am going to talk about the best entry and most importantly, the real entry, which formed at the first breaker. If we look more specifically, I believe we left that open. Yes, we did leave our gap open. Now, I understand that this makes it better, right? I prefer us to have a breakaway gap because they act as rocket fuel for price, as ICT says. So definitely the better outcome there, but you had an inverted fair value gap to provide you an entry. I want to see if I can just change these. There we go. So we did have an inversion fair value gap, which provided you an entry. You would have entered at this very specific level, which is 145 at 145. Now your stop would be looking at the inversion fair value gap right here. You also had, did we inverse this? No, this wasn't yet inversed. So inverse fair value gap above order block. So you had one tick smaller stop loss compared to the other, but which led to almost, well, actually pretty much 1R more, right? Remember the other one was 3.36R, and now this more precise entry is 4.3R. Hence the divergent factors in people who trade my model. Some people are making a little less R than others, and that's due to the precision of what they trade, right? Are they trading a first breaker, or is this their breaker and this is their entry, right? You do have to understand that it is mechanical, but there will be a lot of breakers in your 1 minute chart. And the simplest rule and the only rule is you use the first one. You always use the first one, and if you're taking a continuation trade, well, I talked in length about that last week. If you guys are interested, I don't know who watched it, who did not. It's in last week's PA review. I did a PA review. I'll just have to find which one, but I believe it was early during the week. Now, as we said, NASDAQ did not reach its objective, but ES did, right? So you had your objective here. You also had a low-hanging fruit objective along the way. Utilizing the same rules, you would look at a 5 minute chart, look at your range. I don't understand why my gun box is not drawing on a 5 minute chart. Give me a second. It is supposed to, whatever. You would look and you'd see this fair value gap. So I'm only going to draw a line because I'm only utilizing this as a low-hanging fruit objective and nothing else. So I'm not going to see the reaction. I just want to understand that this is my low-hanging fruit. Now your low-hanging fruit would have offered 2.6R, which is beautiful, and then held until lunch lows. And you also had the current morning lows, right? Which on ES, no, wasn't current low of days, but you had that. You also had London lows, right? So ample opportunity to leave a runner, but definitely, for example, if I had 4 contracts, 2 here, 1 here, and then 1 runner with a very tight stop, probably at the high of this large fair value gap, up until we traded back into it, rebalanced, and then now my stop loss would have been here. I would have been trailed out there. I say I would have been because I did not trade this PM session. I wasn't feeling too well and I already had my morning trade, so I decided not to engage, which, yes, I do regret at the moment, and I journaled about it, but I won't ever be able to catch all of the opportunities, so definitely was happy with my day. Are there any questions about the day, and more specifically the two opportunities that I just talked about? Because yes, I'm not going to talk about the back and forth afterwards or the triple equal lows we did to then start pumping. And no, these are not high probability opportunities in my book. I'm not seeing any of you guys type, so I'm guessing it was pretty clear again today. I saw a few executions today in the Discord. A lot of you guys are doing very well, and it's very nice to see. So, on that note, I wish you all a great night, and we'll see each other tomorrow once again for a final price action review of the week. You guys have good luck trading tomorrow. See you guys.